Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. My name is Prism Dawn, and this is a continuation of a series that I began a while back, where I'm just looking at the best way to utilize each planet in the chart, or sun in this case. And the whole premise of calling it the Birthing Consciousness series is just the realization that we as souls are here gradually building up our body container to be able to hold greater and greater consciousness on this planet, and that there are things that get in the way of that and that need to be worked through in order to be able to hold our highest potential here. And those things show up as karmas, and the way that they interfere with the charts being able to express itself only as positive, that just shows us where we're blocking the fullest light of each planet or each archetypal influence in the chart. So if we have filters that are keeping us from being able to experience them in their truest essence, then we're going to see distortions. And so it's just a way of tracing your way back into the most positive expression of those archetypes by finding those distortions and working through them. So the intention being, of course, that we can bring our whole selves into our every experience and to express ourselves as the divine beings that we are. So this one is making the most of the sun in the natal chart, and let's just get right into it. So just quick notes on the sun. Sun itself, source energy, itself with a capital S, and it's infinity. It's the still point. I'll say more on that later. It's the sacred heart. It's wholeness. It's creator light. It's unity. Essential. It's beingness, and it's God. And I say essential, meaning reference to just our pure essence. And the difference between capital S self and lowercase s self is the energy that you're tuning in from. So are you tuning in from your higher self, from your essence, unimpeded by your karmas or false beliefs, or are you tuning into the chart from, or in your experience or anything, from that lowercase self, which is the earth self container that is maybe buffering a little bit, that bringing in your full holist self doesn't feel safe for one reason or another. So we have our defense mechanisms, we have our personality that we oftentimes, our personality is informed by our essence, but it's also informed by the ways we don't feel safe in our essence. So it's the face that we choose to show the world, and that would be the lowercase self, when it is coming from anything other than a feeling of safety and wholeness. So starting with the sun glyph, the circle part of the sun glyph represents the spirit. That's the outer circle. And spirit is non-linear with no beginning or end. The circumference is everywhere. The beginning or end is nowhere. So spirit is truly all things. And the dot in the middle of the circle represents the still point, which spirit emanates from, which is source. So further clarification on the still point. So it's not just represented within the glyph, not just the sun. It exists within you as well. So this is your central point that connects your infinity within to the infinity without. It's unity. It's the source of your emanation, emanating your essence to the world. It is the source of your pure creation, what one calls God, and some simply call source. Pure creation from a place of all potential. It is our inner sun, our radiance. So the still point is where we connect our infinite selves to the infinite all, So more on the Sacred Heart. Leo is often referred to as where the heart resides. Leo is connected to the heart, and also connects to the energies of the solar plexus chakra. The Sacred Heart exists directly between those two. So this point within, that still point, our source energy, this point within is also known as our Sacred Heart, which is located within the body. It's between the solar plexus and the heart chakras. It's called the Mobius in ancient Sufi teachings. And the Sacred Heart is about being loved just because you are. You don't have to do anything to earn love. You don't have to do anything to validate your right to love. That just by being, you are absolutely entitled to love. And it's joy, it's preciousness, courage, it's ecstasy, our ecstatic selves, sitting between the Manipura, the solar plexus chakra, and the Anahata, the heart chakra. It connects both to our sense of direction, willpower, our sense of direction, our willpower, purpose, love, heartfelt passion, our warmth. Leo, the sun, you see how it's the Sacred Heart, because everything that we're describing, it's the Leo archetype. So returning to the image of the glyph, while the dot in the center is the Sacred Heart, the circle surrounding is the container for our essence. While the circle is spirit, and spirit is all things, it's what some refer to as the blanket theory, that there is just one thing that makes up and connects all of us, and that the separation is just, I don't want to say an illusion, but just a misperception of what we're made up of. So what we're made up of in all things is spirit. And just one spirit vibrates differently on each of us, depending on the nature of our unique essence, has its own vibration to it. So the sense that we are separate, and we might say, my spirit, your spirit, there's actually just one spirit, but it just feels different on me than you, because it's resonating differently on each of us. So, so the circle in the glyph is our own personal expression of spirit. It's our container for how we are uniquely holding and vibrating spirit according to our essence. So I think I already said the rest of what I'd written there. The still point, again, it's the source of our, the emanation of our being. And the container is where we get to hold all of that and bring that out into the world in a way that is uniquely us. So what is essence exactly? Your essence is your own personal archetype. It's what differentiates and individuates you from source. It's the place of being that you've cultivated, and the way you're oriented to directing that being into the world for good use. The sun in its purest expression is joyful, creative expression through our purest, most radiant essence. We adore and delight in the experiences of this realm and the opportunity to engage. As a soul, we can find maturity while also maintaining the childlike nature of our essence, maturing into our ability to bring ourselves forward fully. And this is also where the counterbalance in Aquarius and Uranus helps us to mature. And the description that I wrote here about essence, mind you, is from the perspective of divinity, where there is not a negative expression. This is when our essence comes through unimpeded. So the difference between essence and ego, and the thought this would be a good time to segue from essence to ego, because when we learn about the sun in astrology, we have learned to associate the sun to the ego. And that's not necessarily, it's not necessarily that the sun encompasses ego so much as it's the archetype, the true archetype has to do with our essence. And so ego is the kind of the shell that we can put around our essence, kind of a surrogate container for our essence when we don't feel safe, when our essence doesn't feel safe being in the world fully. So while the sun is associated with ego, this is only relative to our essence being put through the filters and the packaging of the ego. The reason why we don't all exactly experience the sun according to the beautiful description I've laid out is because of the filters we create through our karmic experiences and through false beliefs. We develop confusions and defenses. We feel our innocence, which is our essence. Our essence is, when we talk about reclaiming our innocence, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about getting back to our pure essence. So we feel our innocence is attacked by others as judgment, while in a body and acclimated to the denser karmic energies of this world, we forget that we are one with Source. We might know it conceptually. At some point, you might learn about the concept, and it might feel right to you. But when there's wounding in the Mobius, and again, that's the sacred heart, we feel carved off from Source and from our own innocence, which is, that is what the original sin is. That was the fall from the fall that they speak of in biblical circles. It's what that's the metaphor for, is our sense of separation from Source. And in EA, we talk about exhausting desires as we separate from Source and then the return to Source. But where karmas come up have to do with that separation, when we separate from Source in such a way where we forget that we are of Source, that can create a lot of confusion. And then on our way back, we were able to get rid of all of those things that are in our way from actually really truly feeling our divine connection to Source that we aren't necessarily supposed to lose connection with. We don't, as I say that, I think there's value in losing that connection for the, just to individuate, kind of getting thrown out of the nest, so to speak. But that it's not the kind of sadness and loss that we feel really is just a byproduct of that. And it's the story in the Bible of the with the apple in the Garden of Eden. That's a metaphor for whenever they ate the apple, it was actually the apple from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so that created judgment. For the first time, as souls, we experienced, it was the creation of duality. So as opposed to being operating on our, as an individuated soul, still connected to unity consciousness, then we get stuck in this duality where everything is now getting carved off. By through judgment, we're relegating things to either being good or bad. And then this idea of, well, I don't want to be bad, or I don't feel safe around you because you're bad. Then we start seeing like more separation, and that begets even more separation until we end up with a little bit of a mess, and it can be hard to carve our way back from that. So when it comes to feeling our connection and oneness with Source, we might know it conceptually, but due to judgment, the woundings that we have taken on in the Sacred Heart, we feel carved off from Source and from our own innocence, because it's through the Sacred Heart that we connect to our own innocence, and the journey back to connection is the journey back to innocence. So the simple act of being no longer feels safe. And I'll just say too, while I'm drawing parallels between this and biblical fables, is that this is also the place where sin and karma are talking about the same thing. So what is the opposite of sin? It's innocence. So that's what when we're lost our innocence through the separation from source, through duality, now on our way back, it's our return to innocence, to our true self. And yes, this is all connected to the sun. The sun is it's our inner sun, is our innocence. Our childlike innocence. The Leo, the sun, is our child. So the simple act of being no longer feels safe, as we feel judged or unaccepted for who we are. Our essence, unloved. And we forget who we are because our true nature is love. What the expression of our innocence out, that vibration is actually love itself. So when we lose touch with that, it's easy to feel like you're trying to get your sense of love back or your sense of self back. And so much of this wounding is just connected to where we feel a lack of love, hence a lack of ourselves. So being no longer feels safe. We feel judged or unaccepted for who we are. And our essence, we then feel unloved. So our essence gets covered up and distorted in an attempt to be more acceptable, to regain love. We might package ourselves, adopt certain personality traits that we feel like will get us the kinds of love that we're looking for, or make us feel like we'll be worthy. So we convince ourselves, or so we might do that, or we might adopt personality traits based on convincing ourselves that we don't even need love in the first place, that we're just fine without it. And so free of these distortions, through the Sacred Heart, we are one with all, with Source, connected to Source. We know we are loved. We love others with abandon and without fear. And this is when we think of the Leo in its highest light, this is the Leo that we picture. So on the nature of the ego was formed in Cancer through the moon. And when you're looking at any of the archetypes in the chart, it's really appropriate to look at it in context, the sign before it and after it, to know what the trajectory is for how these traits are being developed, or the process of the soul creating consciousness here and an awareness of itself here. There's a progression through the signs. So the ego is actually first formed in Cancer through the moon. While the sun shines indiscriminately, the moon only reflects this light as a mirror. It's the development of our reflective nature, the inner experience. And the moon represents filters, which is what the ego is, a collection of filters. As we reflect on experiences, hard or even pleasant, we might come away with distorted or false beliefs that we adopt. And these adopted perspectives filter our perceptions, and these filters form the ego. False beliefs as in, I'm not worthy of love, for example, or I don't need love. These would be false beliefs that would cause us to act a certain way, that would go on to create all sorts of karmic conditions for ourselves, that we would have to then manifest experiences that would challenge us and our beliefs, so that we could overcome them and find our way back to our innocence. And so the ego is very much connected to karmas. The filters are very much connected to karmas. It's not that the filters themselves are, well, the filters themselves basically are the karmas, because as soon as we develop the false belief, then spirit or divine will starts to conspire to create situations for yourself that will challenge those beliefs. And that's what we experience as the cause and effect that we associate with karma. It's, I do this, and then the same thing will happen to me. It's actually there's a little bit of understanding or clarification around what that is. It's I believe this, therefore I act this way. And then life conspires to put me in a situation that's going to challenge that belief so that I can change it, so that I can get that out of the way. And then my essence can operate as it's meant to. So to a primitive consciousness, the reflection of sunlight on the moon might be mistaken for having its own light source. So the moon might be mistaken for having its own light source, as you could say, like a mini sun. But this is a distortion. It's not truth. Throughout the lunar month, the shape of this miniature sun would seem to change, only revealing parts of itself at a time. If you mistake it for the light source, you will, because the light source is source, you will not be perceiving it accurately. Yet, if we are to take on the sun directly, then its intensity is too much to withstand. So the filters can be useful to help orient ourselves to whatever amount of the exposing of our essence to this world feels manageable. And it is so precious and can feel so vulnerable. So when talking about the various filters of the ego, there's value also in acknowledging that that whole process has its own divinity to it. It's not that we're doing it wrong necessarily. It's that when we come to this planet and it's already dense with karmas and matter is dense, and we're trying to experience ourselves in a body as matter, then there's going to be some adjustments that need to be made. And sometimes that, well, I don't know if it ever could happen all at once. It can be a little bit of a process for building up your container. In order to be able to bring your whole self here fully, you have to really strengthen your vibration in the face of the density of all these karmas here. So the personality, the ego, can actually be really, really supportive in that process. But your inner sun, your true essence, it's still in there as your inner witness. And so the process of engaging out here through the ego, through the personality, you still have your inner witness if you are able to really connect with and cultivate with that aspect of yourself. And over time, there's a gradual process of handing the reins over to that inner witness as you slowly strengthen that perspective. As you slowly strengthen having that be what you are seeing through and experiencing life through, then over time that's the process of birthing that greater level of consciousness here. It's birthed through the source, through the sacred heart, into the container, which again is in the glyph, it's that circle. So the ego gives us a way to package our essence that makes us feel more protected. But spirit work allows us to strengthen our inner sun and our capacity to withstand such light, so that we may slowly shed our ego and bring our essence forward unfiltered, safe in the knowing that we are loved just for being, because our connection to source is once again fully and directly engaged. And we need not any other external confirmation that we are lovable when source love is ignited within. So just looking at the sun again in relationship to the rest of the chart, looking at Leo, we can see, I spent some time talking about the formation of the ego in Cancer, but on his other side, we have Virgo. And the relationship and the development of the soul between Leo and Virgo can feel really, it can feel really jarring. It's Leo wants to expand. Leo is that yin. Leo is that yang energy. So it's the whereas the moon again is reflected while the sun shines indiscriminately. You could say that's very much Leo. It just Leo shines indiscriminately, and that yang energy, it just wants to come out. It wants to express that place of pure creation, pure potential, as Leo uh, is the seat of our creativity, and it's because of that sacred heart connecting us with all that place of pure potential, connecting us with all that is, and then from there we can bring things forward in just really creative ways. When you get to Virgo, all of a sudden there's, instead of this aspect of just shining indiscriminately, Virgo is a contracting energy. It's the yang, the yin energy. So the yang in the chart is where we focus our will onto our environment in a way that can inform the environment what it needs to be for us. That's how we are creators. The yin energy contracts that into a form. So while Leo just wants to play, it wants to be creative, sing and dance and paint, and just be its loving self out in the world. When it hits Virgo, suddenly there's this realization that that it can be for something. And I want to be careful of the word should. Then you're getting judgment into it, and that's where, when it meets an unhealthy or shadow aspect of Virgo, you're bringing in judgment. And a judgment is the killer of the Leo spirit. It really is. And the judgment really is a shadow side of Virgo. The higher vibration of judgment is discernment. So it's when you are in an experience and you feel suddenly that something doesn't feel right about what someone just said, our shadow, we will likely judge that person. And when you are judging them, you're again, that's the casting off from their essence. You're treating them like they're just, the act of being doesn't make them worthy, that they have to do something to earn that acceptance from us. So we're judging them as not being good enough. And that's really debilitating. And when Leo meets that energy in Virgo, it's debilitated. The true function of Virgo is not to humiliate Leo. I wouldn't say that humbling Leo is a bad thing when you consider what humbling really is. It's humbling isn't meant to belittle. It's meant to suddenly see yourself in the context of this greatness that you can be a part of, and that you have real skills to bring to it. And so that's what Virgo does. Virgo is tools. It's not just getting to play and be creative and just love and shine your heart blissfully and indiscriminately. It's, yes, but how can we really make use of this? What tools do we now have to take this energy into our environment? So the third quadrant of the chart the second quadrant of the chart, that's a part of the transition of the development of the soul, is that first quadrant, the first three signs, this awareness of self. The second quadrant, which Leo is in the center of, is the integration of self with environment. So in Cancer, we have some awareness of our environment. We start forming the ego as a way to really compensate for in our path to are trying to figure out how to be in our environment in a way that feels safe. Leo is just right at the center of it, and which is fitting for Leo. And now that you feel like you've got your bearings, you want to be here and you want to play. But then when it meets Virgo says, yes, but while you are integrating yourself with the environment, you have more that you can offer your environment than just play. And you have things that you can do here that you can accomplish if you take that creative spirit and you put it into service. And so that's the contraction of Virgo. It's all about, how do I take all of this, this actualization, the sense of purpose, this creativity, and then be more discerning with where I'm putting it in such a way where I can make an actual contribution where it's needed. I can meet people where the need is in service. Oh, also looking at Aquarius, so across the chart. Aquarius is in the fourth quadrant, and that's really the kind of grown-up sphere of the chart when it comes to the maturity of a soul. So it's the area of the chart where it's the integration of self with society. So this much larger context, not just your environment, but what it looks like to have really accomplished stepping out into the world and what you do when you're there. So Aquarius and Uranus, it really challenges that aspect of Leo, where you might have adopted personality traits based on wanting to be loved. When you do that, you might not actually be when you do that, anytime you adopt traits based on a false belief, because you say you want love, but really when you're connected to source, you have it, you have all that you need. So that false belief causes you to behave in ways that carves you off from your essence. On the other side of the chart there, to balance that out, is Uranus really challenging you to actually really be your essence authentically. That anytime that we are carving ourselves off, we're losing touch with what it is that we're really here to bring and who we're really here to be. And in Aquarius, we are able to really find our community of like-minded people, so that we are able to really get to experience what that feels like to be ourselves in a safe way and in an environment that really supports that. So moving on, what it looks like to put the sun to work in your chart. So the sun is what you do naturally and joyfully, where your creative talents support you in using your will to manifest in this world. It's where your essence naturally engages. It's where you are able to show up and lend your part to creating a world that better reflects the love of Creator, just by being the love that you are. And this is where we, as creator beings, are in our light. This is where we're expressing our God selves. And when you are operating from your pure essence, from the Sacred Heart, it is from this place where your will and God's will are one, or if you would call it source, or just what I refer to as the divine natural order, the will of nature, finding harmony, creating harmony and balance in our environment. And so this whole question of free will, yes, through our free will, we can create and adopt all sorts of karmas, but by aligning our will with that will of that one source, with divine order, we can still express our individuality, still express our individual essence, still make decisions, but then we're working with the will of one rather than against it in ways that it will cause it to put situations in our path that would course correct us back into alignment. So what you create from this space is a manifestation of truth. What you create from the space of your will being aligned with the will of the one. So when you're working from that space, what you manifest is truth, not filtered by your ego, but flavored by your essence. When you're not operating from that space, what you're manifesting is not truth, what you're manifesting is karma. So that aspect of when you're engaging in your environment through truth, truth being meaning just your essence from connection to divine will, that is the ultimate truth. And that expression of self is the capital S expression of self. When you are operating from the lowercase expression of self is when you're creating karmas. So we observe this in the chart, not just by placing what sign the sun is in. It's placed by sign, house, and aspect. That's where we are able to understand where our essence is wanting to express, because our essence is not as simple as one sign. So Linda, it looks like Phoebe hasn't joined us, but like I said, I have a lot of notes on her chart. So so we'll just use Phoebe as a volunteer. And I'm trying to keep an eye on the, okay. All right, and I'm trying
just go ahead with that, that's fine.
Okay, got it. And I'm gonna try to keep an eye on the time here too. Feel free to ping me, because I might just be too focused. But
feel free to go over time, because this is an open-ended meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So Phoebe wanted to look at what her path was in her chart relative to her sun and what it looks like to show up. So the sun, interestingly, is right on the IC. I mean, like just like a half a degree difference, and it's in the third house, which is an intercepted house, but it's in the sign of Leo, which is ruling double in her chart. And we will look at what that means as far as the interception here in a minute. So the sun is with a stellium in the fourth house. The fourth house is a stellium with the Mercury and the moon. And see, I had a question for Phoebe, but we'll move past that. So the looking at what her sun is doing is actually a pretty there's a lot going on here. It's not just as simple as looking at the sun, because we're looking at the interceptions, and when you have an interception and something that is ruling double, and some signs that are ruling no houses, then you'll see that she doesn't have Aries or Libra ruling any houses. So signs that are in Aries or Libra are going to have a harder time. Did I look at that right? No, I apologize. So no, that would be Gemini and Sagittarius aren't ruling anything. So signs that are in Gemini and Sagittarius, or planets that are in Gemini or Sagittarius, are going to have a harder time expressing themselves because those signs aren't actually ruling any areas of her life. The houses being the areas of her life, and those are where her nodes are. So sometimes it's just that those areas are so developed that they don't actually need to be ruling anything. It comes second nature. You're going to have to talk to the person to get a sense of where that is. But in this case, I had surmised that that there was a lot of wounding, that because of all of the squares to the nodes, and the nodes being in those intercepted signs. The squares to the nodes tell me that there's a lot of stuff unresolved, not that it's overdeveloped, that there are some things that are actually challenged and needed to be integrated. One of those being the Mars in Virgo in the fourth house. So that that sense of safety and connection that you get, the sense of belonging and inner experience where you feel safe within the home, relative to the fourth house, that being that there's Mars there with Virgo square to the nodes, and the nodes that it's squaring, well, yeah, so the nodes that it's squaring are on the Gemini Sagittarian axis. And I've interpreted this as wounding, and I spoken to Phoebe too, and we've discussed this. So this is something that I feel like I can speak about accurately. But I interpreted this for her before when she volunteered to mean that there was some wounding around being a martyr, that there was this expression of speaking her truth relative to her North Node in Sagittarius and the sixth house. And the sixth house in Virgo have a potential to represent the martyr. And so that Mars hot, fiery energy with there, I honestly, I took that to mean that she was burned at the stake, and that there's been a lot of pain around speaking her truth. And so when you see something like that that has so much so much impact to it, and that is also intercepted, it's showing me that her chart really doesn't want to touch that wound directly. And also, I say burned for speaking her truth relative to that being opposed by Jupiter, also intercepted. So and Jupiter being in Pisces, so having speaking up from a spiritual place and then being martyred for it. So that being a wound that has to really be managed indirectly. And the way that we see where we can access that or get to that in those indirect ways is by looking at what is ruling that Mars. And in being in Virgo, it's ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is sitting there in a stellium with her sun and her moon. So this chart is actually a really good chart for looking at everything that I was talking about before, when it has having to do with the way that the sun and the moon work together in ego formation, expressing the Leo archetype. And in this case, her Mars is integrated through her south node. When you are looking at what node to integrate through, if you were standing on the chart from that planet that needs to be integrated looking outward, it would be the one to the left. So in this case, it's integrated through Gemini, South Node in Gemini in the 12th house. And that has to do with, in the past, I believe that the way that she's acted this wounding out is to hide. That's something that was unresolved from her South Node is her past. So from the past, that was the thing that was left unresolved, was hiding. So the solution really is her sun. Her sun, that Leo energy, that Leo archetype sun energy, being in stellium with her Mercury ruling that Mars. It's how do I overcome this tendency to hide, to really speak out and put myself in front of the world and really work on that core wounding, because the wounding really is to that sense of preciousness, to that that sense of I have value. There's so much of that wounding is just so connected to that Leo archetype. I have value. I'm allowed to be here. I don't have to hide. I can express my essence and be okay for it. That's the antidote to all of this. That's the antidote to her skip steps. Her chart is really highlighting that as a solution for her. And it might be that if we didn't have that stellium ruling her Mars, we would be interpreting this chart differently. The solutions would be written differently. But in this case, since those woundings are hard to touch through the archetypes that they specifically relate to, she's being given this wonderful gift of her sun and saying, hey, this lifetime for you is really about just knowing your own preciousness enough and knowing your own value and what you have to offer enough that you will step forward, that you don't have to hide, that you can take joy and delight in expressing yourself. I took a lot more notes on this, but honestly, I think I'm talking about it already off the cuff, but I'm going to see if I missed anything here. So so that hiding that happened in the 12th house has to do with spiritual bypassing. So what spiritual bypassing is you're so afraid of ego, or you're so afraid in this case of your own essence and protective of it, that you find ways to overcompensate for where it doesn't feel safe by just being with God. I'm just going to be with Source. I'm going to be over here putting my essence with Source, and I'm not going to engage out here because that's too scary. And I'm going to interpret everything that's happening out here as like, well, it's all God anyway, so it's okay. Or um, or that if it's happening out here, then if these people are being terrible to me, then it must be that they're wounded. And then we start making excuses for them, anything to keep us from feeling the pain of what they're causing us. And that's our way of kind of hiding and hanging out with Source, is I'm just going to focus on the part where I'm still okay no matter what. But in reality, that is hiding, and you're not bringing yourself out. You're not okay. You might feel like you're okay, but you're not doing what you came here to do. So this, her son in her chart is really forcing her out of hiding to say, hey, you actually came here to do some stuff. And it's time to really get to work in bringing that essence out into the world. In her case, you notice how it's just barely on the edge of that third house there. And that third house is connected to that Gemini energy. It's the showing up in her area of life, having to do with being someone who can get out there and speak, someone who can write about her experiences in a meaningful way that will touch people. And the fact that it's right there on her IC tells me that when she does that, there is a lot of ancestral karma that she's going to be accessing, which might make it in some ways feel a little more, even more intimidating, that that's such a deep well. And that really could be the reason for such deep wounding that she's experienced, the karma that she's taken on. Because we do take on karma for the collective, that we do get into these situations where a certain false belief that we adapt, when we make our way through it, we realize that belief wasn't natural to our essence, necessarily. It was something that we took on as a part of our work that we showed up here to do for the collective, that we have to take on certain things sometimes to help move those things for our ancestors, because there's a lot of trapped karma on this earth. If we're all doing our own individual work, it can help to not add to it, but there actually is a need to take on a little bit more than what's just for the individual. And so it's a gift to for someone to go that deep and to experience something that hard, so that they can heal that for the collective. And so as Phoebe does that work of really applying herself in that area of her life that has to do with having a voice, having something to say, third house, having her words having value, and finding that they do land, that her preciousness does get through to people, and that what she showed up to be does have, it is received by others, and that her words are actually heard. So that's what heals her south node. That's the gift of her son. And being that it's just barely still in her third house, shows it's just such a final final space of that. It's at a later degrees of Leo already, so that does the later degrees do illustrate that there is a sense of mastery having been gained in this area, that there's a fullness to that expression, but showing that while this the sun is really meant to be in a stellium with these other planets that are connected to this fourth house energy, that sun just barely made sure that it was going to land in that third house, because that was a huge part of the work that it's pulling into the stellium. And so I'm going to just scan really quick and see if there's anything else. Not being afraid of ego, the spiritual bypassing, is our way of trying to really avoid developing ego too. But as I said before, there can be a purpose, there can be good use to the ego, because while we might be hiding out with spirit, with source, we're not actually doing the work of really integrating our fullest essences, our fullest selves into our body to be here on the planet doing the work that we're here to do. we have to be willing and able to really engage life. And so while doing spirit work really is about shedding the ego, the part where you are able to really build up a shell for yourself, first, the ego being a shell, and we can do that with as much love and care as we can, if that's what it means to get us to start engaging, that in a way where we can feel safe. That can be that's a real segue for us. And so I just encourage Phoebe to 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 realize that that spiritual bypassing, or that way of not bringing your whole self forward, that actually is, whether we realize it or not, that really is connected to ego. It's still based on false belief that we're not safe. And so the invitation is to get into right relationship with the ego, to make sure that we are engaging it more consciously. That's the whole point, is to bring more consciousness here. So make friends with the ego, and let the ego make friends with the inner witness, and let that process happen. In her chart, there's such a strong invitation for that. So I think that's as far as I need to go with that. That feels like a good stopping point for now. And look, I'm just about at 5:30. That never happens. Just an hour over. So that's all from me. In summary, don't fear the ego. um, don't fear showing up, and just bless everybody and bringing their essences forward. If you I know that it's big karma right now, and I know that it's big work for a lot of us, healing a lot of collective wounds around that. And so I just send blessings and prayers to everybody's sacred hearts, that we collectively honor what it means to really do that work, to bring our whole selves here. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Prism Dawn. And so thanks from all of us. We're looking forward to catching you next time. Bye for now.
Yeah, bye for now. Thank you.